Okay, Craig. So, how's your day going so far?
Pretty good so far. I've been out and about, running and walking, and getting way overheated, and now I'm back in the cool house.
You excited to be promoting this the Moorcock Library Elric is it Elric Stormbringer? Is that how you,
Yes.
okay. Are you
His name is Elric of Meldo. The novel is called Stormbringer, which is the name of his sword.
and so would you say that these are your most popular works? Because from the things that I've read, that's what I kind of get the consensus of is your most popular work is the Elric stuff.
Well, Elric and Sandman, I've worked on both. I've done the 50th issue of Sandman, the Arabian Nights issue, and The Dream Hunters, which was a Sandman graphic novel, and a couple other things related to that. So anything you do with Neil Gaiman, it gets out there. And then the association with Michael Moorcock's Elric goes all the way back to 1979. So it's been a big part of my career.
So when did you initially start? Because obviously you've been doing this for decades. When did you initially start your writing career?
Well, I started as an artist, of course, and I do writing as adaptations, working with other, novels or plays or whatever. But I started in 1972 working for Marvel Comics in Ohio with an artist, Dan Adkins, who had just moved here from New York City after being Wally Wood's assistant for years and working at Marvel. We got tired of New York City in the early 70s and came back home. And I met him and started working with him. He started his studio. And they got several artists who have careers to this day that came out of Dan's studio.
And you had done a lot of different titles from Marvel back then, right? Like I think I'd seen something about Doctor Strange and a few other things that you had worked on.
Right. I did a couple issues of Doctor Strange. My main a gig at Marvel in those years was Killraven. Was based on War of the Worlds. It was sort of their take on War of the Worlds, set in the year 2021. As a matter of fact, or 2020, that seemed impossibly far away, and we've passed the mark. But that was the main work for like 2.5 years that I did at Marvel. That was my character. But I worked on Iron Man and Conan, and as an inker in the 80s, just every character there was.
So how when you initially started with the Moorcock stuff, that was in the 70s?
Late 70s, yes.
Can you tell
Yes.
me kind of chart trajectory for me of how that started and how kind of how it's transgressed to this point now where you are promoting this new thing?
Well, yeah, that's a long journey, but it started with I had not read any Michael Moorcock at that point. Growing up in Ohio Rivertown, the local bookstore was Hill's Department Store, and they had the Robert E. Howard and Edgar Rice Burroughs, but no Michael Moorcock. This would have been in the 1960s when I was in junior high and high school. And over the years, then when I was living in New York City, people would mention him and they said, "You haven't read Michael Moorcock? You would love Michael Moorcock." Well, I hadn't. And then Mike Friedrich, who was a writer at DC and Marvel, was starting his own company, Starreach. And he got the rights to Michael Moorcock's Elric. And he asked me if I would do The Dreaming City, which was from the third volume of the Elric stories. And it was, there were like 3 short stories in the novel. So I did The Dreaming City, and it was supposed to be a book with another 30-page story in it by another artist. I forget the vicissitudes of all of that. It went through several publishers before it ended up at Marvel as just a 160-page book that I drew with Roy Thomas doing the scripting. And that's how I fell into the Moorcock ethos. And I loved it when I read it. It had all the fun stuff that I liked to draw.
So this new thing that is being promoted now, is it kind of a culmination of the things that you've done with this, or is it something, is it going to have new content?
Well, it is I think all the first 6 novels, or the 6 novels, Elric, that Moorcock wrote, have been done over the years by myself and various other artists. I mean, like I say, it started with me working on the third volume because it just seemed a good way to start with that story. Then we went back and started at the beginning. And I did the first novel with Roy Thomas scripting and Michael T. Gilbert working on the artwork too. I would do layouts and he would pencil and I would ink and we would shuffle back and forth. So from there, then they started doing the volumes in sequence with various publishers, I think, over the years, Pacific and First. And I dropped out after that first 6-issue novelization, but then they came up to the third volume and Marvel still had copyrights to that, and so we had to do a revision. And after all the way up to the 6th volume, when I came back on again 10 years later for Stormbringer, and at that point I did the scripting myself and all of the artwork for a 7-issue series, about 190 pages or so.
So then have you touched any other mediums or thought about touching any other mediums with these stories, or are you strictly kind of focused on comics and writing and art?
Yeah, that's been the focus of, I've been doing this now for just short of 50 years, and that's what I like to do. The farthest afield I go from sequential storytelling is single individual illustration, for an illustrated book, or just illustrations on their own or as commissions, whatever. But I'm a sequential storyteller. I love the planning of the story. If I'm working with another person's property, taking that, it's like writing a screenplay from a novel and finding the visuals for it, finding the visuals for those things that are not visual at all in the story. So that's the challenge I love. And then once I get that blueprint done, then you have to draw the whole thing and come up with the pictures. And so actually, like now at this point in my career, I do a lot of layouts, script and layouts for other artists, where I design it like a blueprint, and was sort of like doing storyboards for a film, except on a comics page, all the panels are different sizes and you have a lot, it's a much more fluid plastic sort of arrangement. And that's what I love doing. And then finding, the appropriate artist for it. At the same time, I'm still doing them my own too.
Well, that's really cool, the way that you kind of put that in perspective and the comparison there with how you do the different versions of this art before it lands on where it is. I'm curious, with all your experience with the big two in Marvel and DC, for people who are, more mainstream comic fans, what kind of things would you compare this to, that maybe if people like certain things in Marvel, what of those things do you think could lead them into this Moorcock's Elric Stormbringer?
Well, I think the more supernatural titles like Doctor Strange, or the sword and sorcery like Conan, which and Conan, of course, from Robert E. Howard, those original stories. It's that same sort of world before time, which is great for an artist because you get to draw from artistically all these different cultures for architecture and costume, and just make a mash of everything. That, or Doctor Strange with the occult world that comes into Elric. To me, and a lot of other artists I know, it's a lot more fun than drawing superheroes swinging through Manhattan with all the cars and the buses. On the other hand, that's exactly what some people love to do. So you find your niche. And I found mine with this sort of fantasy world in a way. I mean, I do opera adaptations into sequential art, and a lot like the Magic Flute, or the Ring of the Nibelung. There's your Lord of the Rings and all of that from that opera cycle, with Siegfried and Donner and Fro, and Thor and all of that, Norse mythology. So that leads into that too. So yeah.
My fiance is in the opera. Well, she was in the Toledo Opera for 10 years. So I'm curious about how you started doing that. Like, was this something that you followed in somebody else's footsteps? You saw someone else was doing that, or was it your idea and your love for opera that got you into that?
It was my idea, my love of opera to do it, and also thinking I was the first one to do it. As it turns out, there were some opera adaptations back in the 40s, whether it was Classics Illustrated or something like that. that a couple people had done a single issue adaptation of an opera. I'm glad I didn't know that. But I mentioned Mike Friedrich before, starting Star Reach, and he asked me if I would like to do something for it, and it was complete creative freedom. And a friend of mine had written a prose treatment of the third act or the second act of Parsifal. And he showed it to me and I said, well, I'll do this. And I was already a big opera fan and such, so I did a 32-page adaptation and called it Parsifal. And from there, it just went on to looking for literary properties that sort of tied in. There are a lot of great operas that have wonderful music, but very silly stories. So I wanted one that had some literary heft to it, you know, whoever wrote the libretto, that it was something worth reading. And I've done 11 of them over the years, and I'm working on my 12th right now.
Can you say what the 12th one is, or is that like a secret?
It's Carmen
Oh,
for
nice.
for the Arizona Opera. And
Arizona Opera, shut up.
no.
Because my fiance did Carmen when she was in Toledo. So that
Yeah. So yeah, that's a very visual story with the costumes and the bullfights and all of that, and the gypsy smugglers and all of that. So this is one of those ones where I am taking someone's script, I'm adapting that, adding to it, doing layouts, and sending it to an artist, Anika is her professional name, in Spain. So we just had a Zoom call like this a couple months ago. She was in Spain, I'm in Ohio, he was in Arizona. So that's will be coming out in the next year or so. They might be doing a line of opera adaptations, you know, to sell in their bookstore and tie in with the operas that they produce.
That's awesome. Like my fiance is gonna love that. So, do you have anything else that you're working on other than these opera things? Is there any other projects that you have in the works? I mean, I know an artist and a storyteller always has like 12 things, but
Yeah.
as far as like right now, what is your focus? Is it just simply those projects, or do you have anything else that you're toiling away at?
Well, I'm at the very tail end of adapting Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology book that came out, you know, his prose retelling of the Norse myths that came out a few years ago. And of course, being Neil was a big bestseller. And so we're doing 18 issues altogether, each 20 pages of his retelling. And again, I'm doing the script adaptation and the layouts and some of the artwork. So I did the first 16 pages and the last 34, which is Ragnarok. So I got to do the end of the world again, since I did the Ring of the Nibelung. These things just sort of oddly keep popping up into my career. And I finished that last fall and did all the layouts for everyone else. And now I just have 5 covers left to do, and I'm done with the project, but it's pretty much done. And now I'm doing this Carmen, and I hope to get to the final Oscar Wilde fairy tale next year. I've done 8 of the 9 over the last 30 years, and I got 1 to go.
Well, then you gotta do it. There's no excuses, man.
Hanging over my head for a long time, waiting.
And then you're gonna find the hidden 10th one as soon as you finish it. There'll be a hidden one that's released, and then you got your work cut out for you.
Yeah, they can put that on my gravestone. He missed one.
So before I wrap, I always like to give people a platform to mention anything I might not have asked that you want to share, whether it's about, you know, the Moorcock Library or any of the other stuff that you're working on, or even just like social media or websites you have.
Well, as far as the Stormbringer and the Elric cycle, it's nice to see it in print again. I mean, Stormbringer, when I did that, it was for Topps. You know, Topps Bubblegum was actually going into comics publishing, and it was Topps. And then they merged with Dark Horse, and then Topps dropped out. So it's been out of print for some time. You know, the license for the character goes back and forth. So a company may have published it, but if they no longer have the license to it, it goes somewhere else. So it's been about 25 years since my adaptation of Stormbringer was printed. It's great to see it out there again as part of a collection of the whole cycle. And if there's any more of it in the future, we'll have to wait and see. I'm still doing separate Elric illustrations. People ask me for them. as commissions when we're doing crowd-funded things. And so he's still on my drawing board from time to time.
I think that's a good place to end. I'm going to